Good morning. We're on the rocky slope of Black Mountain, looking at Antelope Peak there in the distance, and I'm going to break here to talk some anime.
Arian. Arian is one of the older epic fantasy theatrical anime movies set in ancient times and telling a story of the classic Greek gods. The ancient world has been partitioned among the three brother gods. Zeus rules the land, Poseidon rules the sea, and Hades rules the underworld. We meet Arian, the title character, as a child being raised by his blind goddess mother, Demeter, off in a secluded land. Uncle Hades drops by for a visit. The underworld, apparently, is a pretty depressing place, and the old god likes to pop out for a stroll every now and then. Knowing Arian's potential, Hades tricks the little kid into going with him with a promise of a cure for Mom's blindness. Then he drags Arian down into the underworld. There, Hades cruelly trains the lad in combat by simply setting monsters like Kerberos on him, forcing Arian to fight to survive. Hades also inculcates Arian with a hatred of Zeus by telling him that Zeus cursed Demeter with blindness. It seems Hades thinks he got the short end of the three-way split of the universe and plans to stir things up. When Arian is grown into a powerful young man, Hades sends him back up to the land of the living like a weapon aimed at Zeus. Arian soon meets a child thief, Seneca, who also ends up palling around with him on his quest. Well, it seems Hades isn't the only jealous god around. Poseidon, who Arian believes to be his father, wants a piece of land for himself and has launched a war of his own against Zeus. Arian runs afoul of Athena, who commands Zeus's army, and is taken prisoner. But thanks to that, in Athena's camp, Arian gets to meet Lesphina, Athena's slave girl handmaiden. Lesphina lovingly nurses Arian back to health. He thanks her for her kindness, and the Florence Nightingale syndrome sits in, and they become really good friends. When the smug Apollo hints to Lesphina that Arian's going to be killed, Lesphina helps Arian escape from Athena's camp, which seems to have been Apollo's intention in leaking the execution plan in the first place. Arian is just getting started on an epic Homeric quest, one in which he'll get to meet most of the Greek section of Bullfinch's mythology. The story moves rapidly from place to place, yet still manages to develop each encounter or conflict to a satisfying level. The many gods are all plotting something. Zeus and Athena are fighting Poseidon, and Hades is watching from the sidelines, hoping to pick up the pieces. Apollo is staying out of the fray while stirring the pot for his own ends. Mostly, Apollo seems to want Lesphina, which makes him Arian's rival. Meanwhile, Athena's hot for Apollo and takes her sexual frustration out on her helpless handmaiden, which makes her Arian's big enemy. Well, you get the idea. These gods are so scheming, promiscuous, and inbred, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who wasn't a close relative of anyone else, and stabbing everyone else in the back. Arian finds plenty of enemies as well as allies on his adventures, and the whole movie ends up being pretty much a Greek tragedy, a retelling of Götterdämmerung from Mount Olympus. Occasionally, the movie struggles to keep the love story that drives Arian front and center. For although Arian is partly driven by a hatred of Zeus, it's his professed love for Lesphina that eventually gives the story its heart. Sometimes that emotional connection gets lost amid all the gods and battles and plots, making the story a little dry despite its fast pace. Arian is a creation of Yoshikazu Yasuhiko, who produced the manga and directed the film from his own screenplay. He came from Tezuka's studio and was animation director for the character designer for the original Mobile Suit Gundam series. He also directed the Venus Wars and Crusher Joe movies of about the same time frame. Arian is lavishly animated for a 1986 anime movie and compares favorably to such contemporaries as Lapido or Dagger of Kamui from the pre-Akira anime world. The fantastic landscapes are often allowed to fade away into partially solid backgrounds. It creatively imagines dozens of weird mythological creatures like Kerberos, the Cyclops, and Typhon. Arian uses many extreme camera angles, often providing a god's eye view of the action from on high or from down below, and it makes interesting use of color in several of the battle scenes, such as here, where each of Poseidon's mighty blows is punctuated by a flash of lightning that suddenly brings out the color. Some of Arian's flashbacks borrow a familiar visual technique from Miyazaki's Nausicaa, illustrating them as line art on faded backgrounds. The music is easily recognizable as by Joe Hisaishi, who composed scores for most Studio Ghibli films from Nausicaa to Ponyo. His distinctive style offers a few interesting orchestral themes for Arian, almost comparable to his work on Nausicaa the year before. When I was younger, there was a B-movie genre of sword and sandal movies that told the classic Greco-Roman tales as an action movie with a strong He-Man star, from the Trojan War to the labors of Hercules. Arian is an anime in this tradition. When I rewatched Arian recently, for some reason I was struck by the similarities to Star Wars. A young man of vague parentage is taken from his family, gets trained in combat, sets off to take on the Empire, meets a pretty girl along the way, who turns out to be his sister, gets sage advice from a wrinkled little alien guy, and blows up the Death Star. It even has a "No, I am your father" moment. Okay, not entirely. All those plot elements come from classical mythology anyway. Arian is a flawed character. There are times when he's under a curse, lied to, or just in a delirious fever when he can be a little hard to find sympathy for his actions. But then his enemies are impossible to like, and it's Arian's flaws that help endear him. Of course, all this is now 25-year-old hand-drawn animation. I've mentioned before that the spread of home video through the 1980s was the genesis for early U.S. anime fandom. Movies such as Nausicaa, Dagger of Kamui, and Arian, as well as OVAs such as Megazone 2-3 and Area 88, which all came out about the same time, commanded disproportionate mind share among older anime fans, because the older anime than that wasn't readily available on home video then. These and a few then-current TV series, recorded off TV onto VHS, mailed across the Pacific and swapped around, were what U.S. anime fandom was. Unlike those other titles I've mentioned, Arian was never given an English language release. I'm not sure if that was a licensing problem or just a cold calculation of its likely popularity here. If I were rating Arian in 1990, I'd give it 4 stars for some then state-of-the-art animation and a modestly entertaining plot. I'm reluctant to recommend it to today's fans, partly because it never had a U.S. release, partly because the animation style has become slightly dated, but also because when I recently rewatched it, Arian's quest just didn't engage my interest as much as it once had. Still, the animation was terrific for its time, so it still holds up pretty well today. If an old-style anime quest through Greek mythology is to your taste, you might give it a watch someday.
Thanks for watching.